My name is Eileen. Standing here outside this once familiar house, I can still hear the echoes of that family dinner, the tense silence that followed my outburst. It was a turning point, a moment that shattered the fragile facade of our so-called family unity. I grew up in a wealthy family in a posh neighborhood. My mother, Vanessa, was a 55-year-old socialite. She lived for parties and the admiration of others. Every year, she'd planned an elaborate family reunion, a grand show where she could display our family as the epitome of success and refinement. The guest list, the menu, the decorations, all were meticulously curated to meet her exacting standards. My father, Henry, was a 58-year-old businessman. He was often overshadowed by my mother's strong personality. He'd retreat into his work and offer only token resistance when my mother's behavior became too much to bear. My younger brother, Leo, 25 years old, was the apple of my mother's eye. He was successful in his high-profile tech startup and seemed to have a golden touch in everything he did. As for me, I'd always been the odd one out. I was more reserved, preferring books and quiet evenings to the social whirlwind my mother thrived in. I'd show up at these reunions every year, playing my part as the polite but invisible daughter. That fateful afternoon, when I arrived at the reunion, the yard was already filled with people. My Aunt Stella was busy taking pictures of the food, while Uncle Frank was loudly complaining about the latest tax laws. Leo was surrounded by cousins, regaling them with stories of his latest business deals. I could hear my mother's forced laughter from afar. When she spotted me, she gave me that overly bright smile and opened her arms. "Eileen, sweetheart, you made it," she said, as if I were an uninvited guest. I hugged her out of habit, inhaling the overpowering scent of her expensive perfume. She glanced at my simple black dress and murmured, "Still keeping it so plain, I see." Before I could respond, she'd already turned away to greet someone else. It was a familiar pattern, passing judgments wrapped in false pleasantries. I found a seat at the far end of the table, near where the kids were sitting. I listened to the snippets of conversations around me, Stella bragging about her son's new car, Frank talking about his upcoming fishing trip, and Leo going on about his new project. My father stood near the grill, flipping burgers and nodding absently at whatever my mother said. There was always an underlying tension, like the calm before a storm. When I was younger, I used to wonder what I'd done wrong to make my mother treat me this way. As I got older, I realized it was about control. I was the one person she couldn't mold to her will, and that was unforgivable in her eyes. Then, Grandpa Arthur shuffled in. He was in his 80s, but his eyes were still sharp. He had a kind face, lined with the wisdom of a long life. When he reached me, he gave my hand a gentle squeeze and whispered, "Holding up okay, kid?" I nodded. He knew how my mother was. "Just remember, there's more than one way to win a fight," he said with a soft chuckle. At that moment, I didn't understand what he meant. Dinner went on, and the sky grew darker. The smell of grilled chicken mixed with the sweet fragrance of the flowers in the garden. My mother flitted around the guests, topping off glasses and making polite small talk. She was the perfect hostess on the surface, but there was an edge to her that made me uncomfortable. When dessert was served, my mother took her place at the head of the table. I was starting to think that, maybe, this year would pass without any more of her barbs. But then, she picked up her glass, looked at me, and said, "If Eileen disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice." The room fell silent for a heartbeat, and then laughter erupted. I sat there, frozen. My glass of wine was steady in my hand, but my reflection in it was trembling. My mother's laughter rang out, triumphant. My father gave a tired little chuckle, and Leo smirked uncertainly. I didn't move, didn't say a word. I just stared at my mother, waiting for someone to say something, but no one did. Grandpa Arthur caught my eye from across the lawn. I could see the disappointment in his eyes, not for me, but for my mother. For the others, the moment passed quickly. The conversation moved on, and it was as if nothing had happened. But for me, the world had shifted. That sentence kept replaying in my head, a cruel refrain. It wasn't the first time my mother had been cruel to me, but it was the first time I didn't flinch. I realized then that she'd crossed a line. The next morning, I woke up to the sunlight streaming through my blinds. I lay in bed, replaying the events of the previous night. I made coffee, and the kitchen was a mess, a reminder of the family's performance that had taken place. My phone buzzed, and it was a text from Grandpa Arthur. "If you're up, swing by. Bring your coffee. Porch is warm." I grabbed my mug and keys and headed to his house. He was sitting on the porch, a blanket over his knees and the newspaper beside him. When he saw me, he gave me that knowing smile. "Didn't sleep well, huh?" he asked. I shook my head. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "She went too far this time."
"But you held your ground last night."
"That's important." I told him I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. He nodded slowly. "Sometimes, the best thing to do is let them expose themselves without you saying a word." He then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for you.
"Keep it safe."
Don't open it until you know why you're opening it," he said. I frowned, but he just smiled and said, "Trust me." When I got home, I started to think about what I could do. I decided to stop absorbing my mother's cruelty and start documenting it. I went through old emails, messages, and family photos. Every happy-looking picture had a hidden cost, an insult, a guilt trip, or a manipulation. Later that day, I went to my father's office. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his eyes red. When I mentioned my mother's joke, he sighed. "She just gets carried away," he said. I told him that she'd humiliated me in front of everyone, and he flinched. He admitted that he should have said something, but he was afraid it wouldn't change anything. I realized then that everyone in the family played their roles perfectly. My mother was the tyrant, my father was the coward, Leo was the chosen one, and I was the scapegoat. I knew I had to break free from the script. A few days passed, and the online noise started. Stella posted an inspirational message about forgiveness on Facebook, and Leo posted a photo of my mother with a caption about family unity. I didn't respond or comment. I just watched. Then, one evening, I got a message from an unknown number. "You should have laughed when you had the chance." I typed back, "Who is this?" But there was no reply. I felt a sense of unease. I checked my apartment, but everything seemed okay. The next morning, I found my front gate slightly ajar. That's when I finally opened Grandpa Arthur's envelope. Inside was his will. It stated that he was leaving his primary estate, including his properties and accounts worth millions of dollars, to me. There was a sticky note that said, "She'll hate this. Don't let that stop you." I knew then what the anonymous text had meant. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The envelope sat on my desk, a powerful weapon. 2 days later, my mother texted me, suggesting we move past the weekend's events. I agreed, but I knew she was up to something. Sure enough, by Thursday, Stella had posted a scathing Facebook post about someone in the family manipulating an elderly man for financial gain. My mother left a trail of crying emojis under it, and Leo commented about people showing their true colors when money was involved. I didn't reply. Instead, I started documenting everything. I created a folder on my desktop with screenshots, dates, and usernames. I called it documentation. On Friday, strange things started to happen. My email password reset itself, and my credit card company flagged an attempted charge from a store my mother loved. Then, I got a message from the university's financial office saying that a request to cancel Leo's tuition coverage had been made in my name. My mother called, furious. "Are you out of your mind? You're trying to ruin your brother." I told her I hadn't done it, but she wouldn't listen. She warned me not to burn any more bridges. I decided to take action. I locked down all my accounts, changed my passwords, and called the university to explain the fraudulent request. I also installed a home security app. That weekend, I drove back to Grandpa Arthur's. He listened quietly as I told him what had happened. "They're getting desperate," he said. "Desperate people make mistakes. Just bide your time." He then slid a brown envelope across the table. "Keep this with the first one," he said. Inside were notarized transcripts of phone calls between my mother and Uncle Frank discussing how to manipulate Grandpa's accounts. I realized then that I had the evidence I needed. The next morning, I drove to Leo's apartment. He opened the door, looking half asleep. I told him to stop being my mother's puppet. He scoffed, but when I showed him the transcript, his face paled. He saw his own name in the conversation about a forged loan document. As I walked out of his apartment, my phone alerted me to motion in my living room. I checked the security app and saw a hooded figure at my desk. 5 minutes later, they were gone. I knew it was Leo. He was the only one with a key. I didn't call the police right away. Instead, I saved the footage and sent a backup to a lawyer friend. One Tuesday afternoon, my mother texted me, saying we were having a family dinner to clear the air. I knew it was a command in disguise. I called Grandpa Arthur, and he said she was panicking. Just bring the truth, he told me. On Saturday, I arrived at the house. Leo answered the door. He looked tired and pale. You shouldn't have come, he muttered. I asked him why she'd invited me, but he didn't answer. Inside, the dining room was immaculate. My mother sat at the head of the table, wearing pearls and a sky blue blouse. Her smile was perfectly rehearsed. Uncle Frank was sitting to her right, looking uncomfortable, and Aunt Stella was scrolling through her phone nervously. My father was at the far end of the table, his head down. My mother greeted me with a fake kiss in the air. I'm glad you came. We've had some misunderstandings, she said. I replied, Is that what we're calling it? She ignored me and said we should move forward. A mediator, a kind-looking woman in her 60s, was sitting quietly near the doorway. My mother said she thought it would be good to have a neutral party present. I almost laughed. My mother then brought up Grandpa's will, saying she was concerned about the changes. I looked her in the eye and said, You mean the changes he made because you and Frank tried to forge loan documents in his name? I laid out the folder with the transcripts on the table. My mother's fingers twitched. This isn't real, she said. I showed her the notary seal and the verification from Grandpa's lawyer. The mediator looked at the documents and said they were serious claims. My mother tried to argue that Grandpa was confused, but I countered with the fact that he was clear-minded enough to record their conversations and set up a trust in an independent bank. I then said, You remember your joke at the reunion, Mom? If Eileen disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. I waited for the laughter to die, and this is my one line. My mother's smile cracked. She snapped, You've torn this family apart. I replied quietly, I just stopped letting you use me as glue. Frank got up, saying it was insane, but my mother told him to sit down. Her voice was trembling. She tried to paint me as ungrateful to the mediator, but the mediator said there was evidence that warranted legal review. My mother's composure broke completely. She slammed her glass down and shouted that I was nothing without her. But then my father spoke up. Enough, he said. His voice was calm but firm. You've been trying to control everyone for too long. You've forgotten what love is. My mother was speechless. Her lips trembled, and her mascara smudged slightly. She whispered that Grandpa was supposed to leave everything to her. I said, He left you the consequences. Her smile collapsed completely. Leo stared at the table, Frank looked at the floor, and Stella clutched her phone. I packed up my folder and said, You all laughed that night. Now it's my turn. I walked out of the house, and the sunlight seemed brighter. The air outside felt lighter. My phone buzzed, and it was Grandpa Arthur. You did it? He asked. I did, I said. He chuckled and said I'd handled it better than he ever could have. The fallout was quiet but far-reaching. 3 days later, the family's digital presence vanished. My mother deleted her Facebook, Stella's posts disappeared, Frank's business page was rebranded, and Leo's college email was suspended. No one apologized, but I didn't need their words anymore. I had found peace in the silence. Grandpa called every evening to check in. My father visited once, looking thinner, but somehow lighter. When I asked about my mother, he said she'd gone to stay with her sister for a while. 2 months later, I packed up my apartment and moved to a cabin in the mountains that Grandpa had always promised me. The first night, I was in awe of the quiet. I sat by the fire and reread a letter Grandpa had left me. It said, You've found your voice. Don't let them take away your peace. You've earned your freedom. One morning, I went into town for groceries. At the coffee shop, a stranger asked if I was new in the area. For the first time in years, I said yes, without feeling like I was lying. As I sat on the porch of my cabin, sipping my coffee, I felt a quiet pride. I had refused to let my mother's cruelty define me. I had stepped out of the story she'd written for me and into my own. The world hadn't ended when I walked away. It had become smaller, calmer, and truer. And that, I realized, was real revenge.